I asked for a 30-minute clearance, but I received a progressive 20. So for those who are outside, expect an immediate. Commercial traffic is increasing. Airports are at near capacity. Manufacturers, ANSPs, and authorities are trying hard to provide sustainable safety nets through technology, regulations, SOP, and man-ops. Unfortunately, the imminent probability of catastrophic events, of uncontrolled pilot-induced incursions are on the rise, as we have just seen in China last month and in Barcelona in 2014, to name a couple. We can blame none, or we can blame all. The fact remains, that is, it's uncontrolled. Although considered superhumans, controllers are always under pressure and thus are limited in their physical and mental abilities. The primary function of a controller is to ensure the safe operations. It seems we're struggling with providing a true safe environment for pilots, especially around the runways. It is time to switch the word from ensuring safety to marshaling safety. Let's have a look at how we can address and solve some core operational safety, capacity, and efficiency issues. Majority of the topics will relate to the TMA. Europe's Flight Path 2050 is the framework for long-term deliverables, and NASA just announced a 17-year project to completely overhaul the US national airspace. Both frameworks are heavily automated infrastructures across all ATC and ATM functions, and they do take away some of the functions from controllers and pilots alike. It is natural that the ears of most controllers, pilots, and regulators are screeching on the words automation and change. But things are and will be getting automated. And aside from a few extreme situations that do require human intervention, we're heading towards automation. It is time to lower controller workloads and the errors associated with it, caused by human mental and physical factors, especially multitasking and task switching. If done properly, the result is increased safety and capacity within the TMA. You can't realistically expect a human controller performance to go up 50% by 2025. It's impossible. With the same required tasks and mind processing, without some technological assistance. Especially when low-cost airlines and ANSPs are literally pulling common folks off the streets, lowering requirements to keep lower salaries both in the cockpit and in the tower. How many Barcelona incursions or 19-meter China near miss do we need to make some perhaps radical changes, which are mainly in our thinking? As the technology is readily available at the operational level, again, we say safety, but we're not willing to step out of our comfort zone and the train of thought. So let's have a look at some concepts that might challenge the ears of some, but they will bring new levels of safety, capacity, and as an end result, lower operating costs for all major stakeholders. What if we could achieve zero human-related incursions? Let's take a scenario of an aircraft progressing on a takeoff roll while another aircraft is edging to a junction down the field for a crossing. We have an incursion in the making and a potentially catastrophic accident. On April 1st, 1999, the controller shouted, "Stop," without the call sign. Almost an identical scenario repeated itself 17 years later, last month, on October 11th, 2016. Nothing changed in 17 years. Why was nothing done on the most problematic safety area? The FAA's #1 priority is to solve incursions, but no operational solution to date. What if there was a way to completely diffuse the situation altogether beforehand? Since we know the positions of all aircrafts and airside vehicles, we can alert the pilot on board the aircraft through a dynamic moving map, giving the pilot his own operational view with all other surrounding traffic, and thus better situational awareness. This provides the pilot with a few more seconds to respond. This is nice, but I still owe you a marshaling solution for zero incursions, don't I? We send a signal to the aircraft that will be in violation. And with the probability of an accident imminent, the aircraft will apply the brakes. Aside from some whiplash, we saved all lives and dissolved the situation very quickly, identifying and mitigating before a controller even noticed it. Not to mention the fast decisions and calls that would have been made and probable errors on the way. The same mechanism prevents wrong turns, deviations from taxi routes, entries to restricted areas, and multiple operations on crossing or converging runways where a future collision is probable. We see these repeating accidents at the busiest airports. Incidents, sorry. Let's have a look how we might be able to increase capacity, safety, and profits for ANSPs and the airports. What if we had the perfect wake separation model? It's the morning rush, mixed arrivals and departures on multiple runways. On one runway, we have a 7-4, and all ready to take off, lined up, is an Embraer. All current wake models are inefficient for your runway throughput requirements because they are static and do not account for real-time conditions. Not to mention, they fail to properly address multiple dependent runway configurations. What if we didn't have to set that egg timer for each operation based on leading lagging pairs? And instead, we have a wake model that takes into account real-time crosswind patterns and braking action to calculate exits and timing for arriving aircrafts. Moreover, what if the controller can visualize the wake impact with an accurate countdown timer, as you can see on the bottom right? It's just about to be airborne, it's rotating soon. And a timer for the next safe operation. And yes, this does include the timing of exiting, of arriving aircrafts depending on braking action and aircraft type. As a result, we increase safety and capacity while lowering repetitive controller workload that is prone to errors. The marshaling side includes the prevention of initiating a takeoff roll or issuing a go-around to an arriving aircraft. Obviously, controllers and pilots are warned beforehand prior to the marshaling intervention. These two concepts put together form the ultimate safety net at airports. And the technologies are available today, especially the precision wake model, as well as the moving map that we've just seen to alert the pilot in real time. Let's have a peek at the future tower and the role of the controller. What will be the controller's role when pilots have all the operational information in front of them in real time, such as ground traffic, braking action, wind conditions, handoff frequencies, initial climb, countdown to next operation, clearance delivery, progressive taxiing, optimal pushback time, optimal taxiing speeds, and best possible route to save fuel, and all in pilot's native language, with clear graphical representation for true all-weather situational awareness. As we know too well that English proficiency is not that proficient, and say again, and confusions on dense frequencies are commonplace, So we need a sustainable solution without the communication issues. By streaming data to the pilot's tablet, all the mentioned information is available to the pilot in real time. Let's have a look at both the pilot and the controller's view. As you can see, everything is known to the pilot in real time for each operation. The only difference is that the controller doesn't need to talk with the pilot unless he chooses to, such as in the case of emergency. All this is possible due to SWIM, enabling information interchange between stakeholders, including air-ground data communication infrastructure, especially CPDLC, Controller Pilot Data Link Communication, that can be used within the TMA. CPDLC is already being implemented in the US along all the airports now as an FAA mandate. By 2019, all clearance delivery will be done by CPDLC, and the voice communication will be ceased. CPDLC has great capabilities, but it is not used properly due to avionics equipment. Shown on this slide is a project that was presented in Eurocontrol 2013 Masterclass. The CPDLC backbone was CETA. Honeywell provided the EFB using a tablet. And once the aircraft was within the TMA, the Iatas application was triggered, providing bidirectional air-ground data streaming, where the pilot has full situational awareness and can request pushback, taxi routing to save fuel, and as well as a runway doing approach. The data displayed is per operation. So winds and turbulence warnings will be provided prior to lineup and up to handoff to departure, and during the landing phases. This means that for most operations, the controller no longer needs to talk with the pilot at all, especially once ICAO permits digital clearances for takeoffs, landings, and crossings. This is something that is being worked on already. So we can achieve true marshaled safety and increased capacity through automated balancing of junctions, taxiways, and runways, timing and controlling pushbacks, clearance delivery, progressive taxiing, sequencing and queuing for lowering congestions at taxiways, junctions and hotspots as well. The controller can use preset routings both based on winds and runway configurations and concentrate on managing the system as opposed to miscommunicating with pilots. It is the same thing as the pilot manages the FMS and the FMS does the flying. The European Flight Path 2050 mandates include direct communication between the FMS and the ground-based systems for functionality, not just the data. So it is really just a matter of when, not the what. Early adopters will benefit from a plethora of ROIs in the areas of safety, operational efficiency, and even increased landing fees thanks to the capacity boost. When we simulated 3 of the busiest airports in the world, we were able to prove utmost safety, lower taxi times and fuel costs for airlines, while capacity was increased during rush hours between 25 to 40% on commercial airlines. All thanks to the solutions we have discussed until now, primarily the dynamic wake model. So if your airport is pushing at max or 300 flights an hour, an additional 25% may buy you enough time and money prior to investing in either additional runway or, as we're seeing more and more, overflow airports, which pose challenges on their own. Let's add some variables into this scenario. Your tower is 2 controllers short for the coming rush, and others are already on their so-called mandatory overtime. It's pouring rain, 0 visibility, and most of your customers are not so English proficient pilots. Not to mention a noisy comm with some bandits playing Friday prayers just to ease your tension. There's no doubt regulators will have to make some hard decisions on new SOPs to match technology for safety and capacity. Currently, Eurocontrol is considered the leader with an active test bed, which includes the SWIM infrastructure for information sharing between all stakeholders, and the FAA is actively applying SWIM for its own needs. If your SOP will adhere to the upcoming mandates, your tower would be running smoothly with just a shift manager and 2 controllers. Where the only thing you would need to do is tell Sambox which runways to use and be there just in case of an emergency. And what about failure? Let's just say the National Remote Backup Center has you covered. We'll see this shortly. Let's talk about airside maintenance. With the moving map in the airport, inside all ground vehicles and wrist and PDAs for every personnel, each personnel can actually see each and every maintenance slot that they have to do and schedule them. They need to be within the airport, where they need to be within the airport and at what time. So for example, if we had a maintenance slot scheduled for runway 01, it would tell the personnel to be at 01 at Echo at a certain time and would slot the runway for a few minutes in order to perform a scan with a known duration for Echo to Foxtrot. The system looks at all the maintenance tasks that are on the runway and synchronizes schedule based on current and planned takeoffs and landings. This way, you do not need to close the runway. You just space them out on the arrivals and departures. The tower has complete control over the process and can be used to synchronize between ground crews and actual runway operations. And I'd like for us to enjoy the next slide. Planning for a national remote backup. It's a must. So you're providing tower services for 3 small airports, and you don't have enough controllers and maintenance costs are just too high. What if you had a command and backup center where a single controller with the right system, the right information, and cameras for multiple airports? The controller can easily provide all ATC services for several airports or as a backup in case tower fails from his single workstation. This solution means that you comply with backup regulations. So instead of putting a secondary backup at each airport, you can use the same backup and it's for multiple airports. This provides you with better fault tolerance and a resiliency in the process. I'd like to talk about 1 minute about marshaling airborne aircrafts. To date, we have a poor track record in marshaling airborne aircrafts in cases where the aircraft extremely deviates from the planned course, or especially in a hijacking condition. A ground-based system that synchronizes between stakeholders at different locations, including the ANSP, airline, and governments involved, allowing for a stakeholder decision and execution. If a decision is reached, the system directly communicates with the autopilot aboard the aircraft, locks it so no one can tamper with it until it is demarshalled, and a new flight plan can be sent to the aircraft for execution. Just a quick note. The good news is that controllers are here to stay, and there are not enough around the world to spare. So everybody's job is safe. However, large ANSPs are already embarking on technological projects to lower controller workloads and increase capacity. Also, an airport can now sustain additional capacity and prolong the use of current assets for a few millions instead of embarking on projects of billions. Even if an airport does need additional runway or additional overflow airport, a sustainable solution with current assets will provide the time to properly plan for the future. It is a worthy note and important to note that all of the mentioned solutions are protected by patent, and some are already on their way to deployment. Thank you very much.